betrayal doesn't always scream. Sometimes it hides in the details, in the subtle changes, in the silence filled with secrets. Marcos never imagined that his wife, the woman with whom he shared his life, was living a parallel story full of lies and forbidden confessions. He didn't discover the truth all at once. It was like a dark puzzle, where each piece revealed something worse than the last. Maybe you felt that strange sensation that something is wrong, but you can't prove it. Intuition screams, but the mind tries to deny it. Marcos went through this. Small signs started to appear. Diverted glances, inconsistent excuses, a new habit that didn't make sense. Until the truth came to light in a brutal way, showing that infidelity and betrayal can be closer than we imagine. And the worst part? The biggest secret of his wife wasn't just the betrayal. It was something much deeper and more unexpected, something that would change his life forever. If you think you've heard all the stories of infidelity, get ready. What Marcos discovered might be the wake-up call you needed. So, leave a like, share this video with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any revealing stories like this. When it comes to stories of infidelity, the emotions that arise when discovering betrayal can be devastating, almost indescribable. Often, people search for an answer to what happened, trying to understand how the actions of someone they trusted reached this point. This story, in particular, is based on a real account where a man's life was turned upside down when he discovered his wife's infidelity. Reading accounts like this, it's easy to identify with the pain, but it's also crucial to understand that often, behind each betrayal, there is a sea of hidden motives, unexpressed emotions, and unresolved situations. In moments of greatest anguish, it's common to want to understand everything all at once. However, when processing the pain of betrayal, it's important to be patient with oneself. Remember that everyone has their own journey of learning and growth. Marcos's example, from the story we're about to tell, is a reflection of how a discovery of betrayal can alter a person's life. It's not just about the pain of the act itself, but also the journey of rebuilding, of learning to rise again after such a deep emotional shock. Often, what seemed like an end is actually just the beginning of an unexpected transformation. Unfortunately, stories like these are more common than we would like to admit. However, by looking at these situations with a clearer and more strategic perspective, valuable lessons can be learned. The suffering of betrayal can be unbearable, but it can also be an opportunity to discover more about oneself. It is at this crossroads that we find the power of choice. How will we react to what has happened? How can we turn suffering into strength? These questions begin to form when we deeply explore what infidelity and betrayal truly mean in our lives. Marcos was never the paranoid type, but certain changes are hard to ignore. Suddenly, Carla seemed like another person. Always so predictable in her routine, she began going out more often, dressing up like never before. New perfumes, different clothes, and even a newly purchased car without even mentioning it. Small details, perhaps, but to someone who knows their partner well, these are the first signs that something is not right. He tried to convince himself that he was overreacting, but the unease grew within him, like a silent omen that something was about to crumble. The human mind is programmed to find patterns, and Marcos began connecting the dots. If before Carla was open about her plans, now everything seemed shrouded in mystery. "Honey, I'll be out for a bit," without saying exactly where. Her phone always glued to her hand, notifications silenced, and that defensive posture when he asked anything. Anyone who has been through something like this knows. Intuition screams before the evidence even shows up. And deep down, he knew that when someone starts hiding parts of their life, it's because there's something they don't want to be discovered. In the face of doubt, there were two options: ignore it and hope he was wrong, or investigate and uncover the truth. Most people prefer to deceive themselves out of fear of the answer, but Marcos wasn't that type. He decided to observe more closely, to pay attention to the details. After all, infidelity rarely starts with grand gestures. It settles in the silences, the vague answers, the habits that change without explanation. And that's how he began to see what he had been trying to deny all along. Fate has a curious way of revealing truths we try to ignore. That morning, as Marcos got ready for yet another ordinary day, a misplaced detail caught his attention. While looking for a document in a drawer he rarely used, his fingers found something cold: 2 old gold rings, kept like a secret. But what really made his stomach churn was the crumpled piece of paper next to it. Just one word written: meeting. Simple, but full of meaning. His heart raced, and a knot formed in his throat. There, in front of those objects, he felt that his suspicions weren't just the product of his imagination. Marcos's mind began working fast. Old rings? Meeting? What did this mean? He tried to recall any conversation with Carla that might justify this, but nothing made sense. He knew that from that moment on, he couldn't ignore the signs anymore. Some would say the right thing would be to confront her immediately, but he chose another path. He decided to observe, to analyze every step, to gather evidence. It was a strategic move. When it comes to betrayal, the truth always hides in the details. And that's how he made the decision that would change everything: to hire a private detective to dig deeper into the story. Hiring a detective wasn't something Marcos ever imagined he would do, but the uncertainty weighed more than any fear. He wanted answers, but he needed the raw truth, without room for doubt. After all, when infidelity is involved, the words of the betrayer often become nothing more than a manipulation game. He didn't want to fall into that trap. So, he took a deep breath, grabbed the phone, and scheduled the first meeting. From that moment on, everything would be a matter of time until the truth came to light. And when it did, nothing would be the same. The wait for the investigation results was tormenting. Every call from the detective made Marcos's heart race, as if he were about to hear the verdict of a silent trial. And when he finally received the report, he realized that the reality was even worse than he had imagined. Carla wasn't just involved with another man. She had been living this parallel life for months. His name was Alexander, a stranger until then, who had appeared from some social media. The exchanged messages, the meetings, the smiles captured by the detective's lens. What had once been a suspicion was now an undeniable fact. But the final blow came with the last folder of documents and photos. Among images of discreet encounters, there was a sequence that made Marcos feel the ground disappear beneath him. Carla and Alexander were together at a gynecology clinic. Not only was she cheating on him, she was pregnant with his child. The realization took a while to sink in. He reread the images, looking for a mistake, a flaw, anything that would tell him this wasn't true. But there it was, laid bare before his eyes. What had once been a marital crisis was now becoming an irreversible rupture. What do you do when faced with such a revelation? Some enter denial, others explode in rage, but Marcos just felt empty. The woman with whom he had built a life, the mother of his daughter, was expecting another man's child. And worse, she had been lying blatantly while leading this double life. The pain was immense, But he knew that the worst was yet to come, because now, more than ever, he would have to make difficult decisions, not just for himself. There was a time to grieve and a time to act. Marcos spent sleepless nights trying to understand how everything fell apart so quickly. But the reality was undeniable. Carla made her choices, and now he needed to make his. He couldn't afford to be paralyzed by the pain. He picked up the phone, scheduled a meeting with a lawyer, and took the first step toward divorce. It wouldn't be just an emotional battle, but a legal one as well. And above all, he needed to ensure that his daughter, Sophia, wouldn't be dragged into the chaos of this betrayal. Sophia, only 7 years old, didn't understand the complexity of the situation, but she could sense something was wrong. Children noticed changes in tone of voice, in exchanged glances, in heavy silences. Marcos knew that, regardless of his pain, he had to be strong for her. His focus on the process was clear: protect his daughter and ensure a safe and stable environment for her to grow up in. He wouldn't let Carla's wrong choices affect the well-being of the child. Infidelity and betrayal had already caused enough harm. Making this decision wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Many men, faced with such deep betrayal, get stuck in cycles of anger and resentment, postponing the inevitable. Marcos understood that prolonging the marriage would only keep him hostage to the past. He chose the path of rebuilding. And as he signed the first documents of the process, a certainty grew inside him. Life went on, and he was ready to start over. It was predictable. After the explosion comes the attempt to put out the fire. Carla appeared, regretful, with teary eyes, talking about mistakes, impulses, and moments of weakness. She tried to justify herself, suggested couples therapy, said they could still fix everything. But how do you rebuild something that has been imploded? Marcos listened to her, not out of hope, but out of respect for what they once had. But he already knew the answer. Forgiveness might exist, but that didn't mean trust would return. And for him, there was no turning back. Marcos decided that his energy wouldn't be wasted patching up a destroyed past. He needed to look forward, and that's how he met Fernanda. Fate has curious ways of working, and it was in a support group for divorced parents that their stories crossed paths. She too carried scars. She too knew the weight of disappointment. Little by little, what started as casual conversations turned into something more. It wasn't just attraction, it was connection, mutual understanding. It was someone who understood what he felt without needing an explanation. The decision to move on was liberating. He realized that many people get stuck in the past out of fear of the unknown, insisting on bonds that no longer make sense. But Marcos chose differently. And by doing so, he made room for something new and genuine. While Carla tried to rewrite the story she destroyed, he was already starting to write a new chapter. And this time, with someone who is truly willing to walk beside him. Time is a silent teacher. In the beginning, Sophia was uneasy with Fernanda's presence. Children sensed changes in their environment, and for her, the new reality was still hard to process. Marcos knew he couldn't force anything. So, with patience and respect, Fernanda became part of the routine, without trying to take a space that wasn't hers by right. Small gestures made a difference. A bedtime story, a shared cartoon, understanding the natural resistance. Slowly, the ice began to melt. Marcos, in turn, found a rare balance. He and Carla were no longer a couple, but they had to coexist for Sophia's sake. It wasn't about erasing the past, but rather building a functional present. Their conversations became objective, without unnecessary grudges, with one single focus: their daughter's well-being. He didn't want Sophia to grow up in the middle of fights and resentments. Infidelity and betrayal had destroyed his marriage, but he wouldn't let them destroy his relationship with his daughter. Fernanda became a pillar in this process. Without rushing, without forcing artificial bonds, she slowly won Sophia over. When the little girl spontaneously held her hand while crossing the street or asked for her help fixing her hair before school, Marcos knew he was on the right path. Life, despite its twists and turns, had given him a new chance at happiness. And he was savoring every second of this opportunity. The truth always finds a way to come to light. Marcos had already moved on from the betrayal, but when he learned of Carla's plan to run away with Alexander, he realized that she hadn't just betrayed him, she had discarded him. She wanted a new life, far from him, far from their daughter, but she ended up tasting her own poison. Alexander had never intended to start over with her. He was already committed to another woman and left her behind without looking back. What Carla thought was a fresh start was, in fact, double abandonment. Desperate and lost, Carla tried to reconnect with Marcos, as if, somehow, the man she had destroyed was still there, waiting for her. But Marcos was no longer the same. He was no longer the man who sought answers amid forbidden confessions, trying to understand what he did wrong. He now knew that the betrayal said more about Carla than it did about him. His life had taken a new direction, and this path didn't include reliving a past that no longer made sense. By Fernanda's side, Marcos found what he was searching for: peace. Not the fragile peace based on the illusion that everything can be fixed, but the real peace of someone who has learned to put themselves first. The past with Carla was now just a story of betrayal left behind, a closed chapter. He moved forward, stronger, wiser, and with the certainty that some goodbyes are, in fact, liberations. If there's one thing this story proves, it's that betrayal is never just a slip. It's a choice. And choices have consequences. Marcos could have drowned in pain, stuck in a past that no longer existed, but he chose something different: to start over. How many people do you know who remain trapped in relationships destroyed by the fear of being alone? How many try to save what can no longer be saved? The truth is, as painful as it may be, sometimes betrayal is the push you need to see your true value. Are you ignoring the signs? Are you holding on to an illusion? Stories of infidelity like this serve to open your eyes and show that life doesn't end after betrayal. It transforms, but only for those brave enough to move on. Would you have that courage? If this story made you reflect, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear this. Leave your comment below and tell me, have you ever gone through something like this? How did you handle it? And of course, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now is the time. Turn on notifications to keep receiving stories that make you think and see life in a new way.